Hello, this is Jay Mahaffey at the Learning Center in Scott, Mississippi. We've been getting a lot of questions about late planted soybeans in the last few days, and I thought I'd get a few people together today and have a little conversation about some of the decisions and some of the points that ought to be made when you make a decision about the variety you're going to plant through the 2020 planting season.
Hi, I'm Chad Nelson. I'm a Bayer Seed FSR in Louisiana.
And I'm Blake Edwards, technical agronomist for Louisiana.
I'm getting a good many questions from growers and retailers right now around late planted soybeans. We've got seep water and backwater issues that's got us planting some late May and even well into June soybeans, and need to be trying to figure out what maturity groups and what varieties we need to be looking at on these acres.
So some of the things to keep in mind, I think, Chad, are certainly whether this land's going to be irrigated or dry land. I think that is a big decision that has got to be made and really factors in on what you need to plant there. Insect management is another one that will play a key role. Red bed and stink bugs have played a large part in our budgets the past couple of years, as well as the harvestability. So if you plant a group 5, obviously those soybeans are going to be in the field quite some time longer, and is that going to interfere with harvesting another crop? So those things need to be taken into consideration. Jay Mahaffey at the Scott Learning Center has been doing these planting date trials for the past couple of years and has got a really good data set. We're going to go over to Jay now and have Jay review some of that data and maybe give us some further recommendations.
Well, here at the Learning Center, over the last 7 or 8 years, we've planted a very diverse set of soybean varieties over a bunch of different dates. I won't go into the early varieties that we planted on later dates today because that's a pretty exotic system, but we have identified several factors that you ought to consider when you begin to make a decision about soybean varieties. Planting date's certainly important. It's the focus of this conversation today. The field status is something that ought to be carefully considered. Is it strong, weak, well drained? Is it wet? Is it irrigated or dry land? All those things matter. Then the tolerance for risk is certainly important to consider because not everyone has the same tolerance for stink bug damage and all the things that are involved in the risk of planting later soybeans on later dates. It exposes those beans to higher risk of insect damage, potentially hurricane damage, and those sorts of things. Now, I don't mean to represent to you that 2018 is all the data we have about this. We've done this work over several years. 2018 is just a year I pulled out to share with you today. And what we did in that particular case was plant soybeans on dates that range from April 20th to June 20th. We also planted soybeans that range from double zeros, which are pretty exotic for us here in the South, all the way out to about 5.6. If you look at the yellow and orange bars on the screen there, you'll see that the 4, 5, 6, and 7, 4.5, 6, and 7, held their yield potential pretty well, even in those later planting dates, which we are approaching now. I think what that says is as long as we plant those soybeans on better soils, we're able to take care of them, they're irrigated or they're on very strong land, they hold their yield potential versus the 5s quite well into the next 2 or 3 weeks. Now, in our work here at Scott, the mid to late 4s have done very well as we planted those into the later season until about mid-June or so, as long as we plant those into less stressful conditions. The advantage of that is the time to harvest. It reduces our exposure to insects and weather risk typically. The maturity group 5 shouldn't be ignored in the conversation though. It's done well in a lot of cases, and it comes with an advantage and disadvantage. The typical disadvantage of planting a later bean later would be the time to harvest. They're going to stay out and linger in the field a little bit longer. The advantage would be that typically and historically the 5s have been tougher soybeans. As we expose them to more and more stress, they seem to take that better. And there are ways to play that into the decisions you make in the next couple of weeks. Now, what does the data say? Our Learning Center data would say that the mid to late 4 has good potential for the next 2 or 3 weeks. The best way to summarize this is plant the bean that is well adapted for the acre over the next couple of weeks. On productive soils, our data would say stick with 45x8, 46x6, and other very well adapted mid to late 4s. As we move later, 2 to 3 weeks, over in the end of that 2 to 3 week period, we ought to think about shifting toward things like Asgrow 52X9, 53XO, and there's several other options available. We also need to maintain a focus on sound management, disease pressure, timely termination, timely harvest, and all the things that make good soybean crops to start with. Thanks for listening, and call us if we can help.